What's up guys, Houndish here, and today I wanted to talk about exotic weapons in Destiny 2. We'll be looking at many of the best exotics in the game, but I also wanted to talk about what makes them feel exotic and highlight some of the key differences between new exotics and exotics from D1, as well as exploring some of why these weapons are the way they are. So getting straight into the weapons, firstly I wanted to look at the more devastating exotics, particularly those in the heavy slot. So of course the Wardcliff Coil, the only exotic rocket launcher in the game. Well, I mean, it's classified as a rocket launcher, but of course it fires a volley of projectiles as opposed to a single target. And the main potential for this weapon being that it can damage a crowd of enemies by spraying those projectiles, and of course you can aim the weapon across an area filled with enemies as opposed to onto a fixed position. You also get mechanized autoloader, which automatically loads ammo that you pick up. So overall the weapon is very strong, but it is a close range weapon. You can't use it like Sins of the Past, for example. The projectiles won't track or will spread too much at longer distances, but the closest weapon you could really compare Wardcliff to would have to be the Gjallarhorn. Of course, Gjallarhorn's Wolfpack rounds in themselves are almost like the volley of projectiles, but they're much more focused, and you also get the initial blast of a pretty strong rocket. I feel like in some respects the Wardcliff is more exotic in terms of its bonuses and how it actually works. It fires multiple projectiles off the bat and also auto reloads. It does, however, operate within the sandbox of D2, so of course the damage is strong, but the weapon is inhibited by things like range and inventory limitations. Nonetheless though, Wardcliff is in the top few exotics in this category, and going forward, assuming that we see other exotic launchers in the future, I'd be very curious to see what they do next and how they could make a weapon feel strong versus what we've seen already. But of course, in the power slot, we also have offerings such as the Merciless. Now, this exotic fusion rifle made me really happy when I first saw it, because it's a pretty cool innovation on how you can use the mechanics of a fusion rifle to create something which feels pretty devastating. And versus Telesto or Pocket Infinity going back in time, this one just feels more innovative. Although that isn't to throw shade on the Telesto, because Telesto, for me, is that bit more flexible. I wouldn't really use Merciless in PvP that much, and I generally find myself rather having the ability to blow up groups of enemies in things like public events, so Telesto is a ton of fun for that stuff. Anyway, I digress. Merciless. It enables non-lethal hits from the weapon to decrease charge time for the weapon. Every time you hit a target without making a kill, the weapon will charge faster the next time. On top of this, reloading the weapon after a kill will increase damage for a short time. It's kind of a strange one because it either encourages you to use the weapon like a normal fusion rifle, or it randomly becomes useful if you happen to get that killing blow on a target. While Merciless is very basic in principle, its damage, especially when using rally barricades, is ridiculous, because if you decrease that charge time on the weapon and then refill the mag with barricade, the weapon won't actually reset the charge time decrease, which is crazy, and it allows you to put out, more than a full magazine and maximum rate of fire. Merciless is a beast. A weapon which we should talk about in the heavy slot though would also be the Colony. So new with Curse of Osiris, the Colony basically brings tracking to grenade launchers, and while this isn't super crazy, it certainly fixes the archetype in this instance because of course grenade launchers aren't very popular. And they approach the tracking in a really interesting way by creating insectoid robot grenades which track targets, because of course this connects with the theme of a viced weapon, but it also opens up possibilities like the grenades actually vertically moving up walls and over boxes. Now in PvE this weapon is always fun to use, but it falls to the wayside because you can get much more powerful weapons for PvE content in general. It's that simple. In PvP though, it's seen a lot of use, especially in Mayhem. It's a really trolly weapon as well. You can fire it around corners or into zones. It's a great weapon. It's simple as that. Next though, if you want a real Firefly hand cannon in D2, then you do have one option. So the Sunshot is an interesting one. Firefly was basically the influence behind this weapon. So it was either John Wisniewski or Claude Jerome on the Crucible Radio podcast. One of them did say that the weapon was basically built using Firefly from D1. The exotic description is that the weapon fires explosive rounds and highlights enemies that take damage, but the perk Sunblast is what causes the targets to explode. Now, it's a pretty strong hand cannon considering it's in the 150 RPM class, but you will get different results on different platforms. On console, the weapon feels okay, and the biggest part of that is that hand cannons in general only ever really feel okay on console. But on PC, Sunshot feels incredibly good. And I'm sure there are, sandbox and technical reasons for this, but the difference between platforms of course doesn't help. To me though, Sunshot is absolutely the coolest and most exotic hand cannon in D2, and it's an interesting point that the weapon is so close to a Fatebringer in a number of ways. So of course you may even say that it's not as strong as the Fatebringer, but a weapon as good as this is 100% considered exotic now, you know? It shows the sandbox has definitely changed in a few ways. Now, on the subject of hand cannons, we do have the Crimson, and this is an example of a weapon with incredibly strong exotic bonuses, which come on a weapon which is kind of, well, it's not the best. What makes Crimson strong though is the Cruel Remedy perk, so kills with the weapon heal the wielder and precision kills also reload the magazine. Now that is a lot of awesomeness in one perk. Of course it's taking the healing from Red Death, the pulse rifle in D1, and then combining it with auto reload on critical kills. And this again is where we can see that sandbox shift, because before we had a pulse rifle, which is generally a much more flexible and of course range capable weapon, which was doing the same thing, but still Crimson is a really fun weapon to use. You just have to be pretty close in order to actually be effective. Of course, because it's a burst weapon, generally accuracy on a lowish rate of fire burst weapon, you know, is a little bit difficult to kind of deal with, and it definitely makes it more difficult at range, although it does actually have a good range stat. The damage drop-off isn't super severe, but the accuracy is. When you get those auto reloads though, it does feel really cool. You keep bringing your health back and reducing your downtime significantly. It's a very, very powerful feeling when it's doing its thing. So it's kind of understandable that this isn't an auto rifle or a traditional hand cannon, for example, but it's interesting how you can see that in some cases they've gone all in on the bonuses and balanced it via the weapon archetype itself, so you have a very exotic feeling weapon which has quite a few drawbacks as opposed to a really good base weapon where the perks feel lackluster, you know what I mean? I think that's a really interesting part of the design. But finally we have a couple of persistent DPS weapons, those which let you fire continuously and exploit a different side of that power fantasy. So the trace rifles like Cold Heart and Prometheus Lens are pretty innovative but kind of basic, you know, it's just a laser beam really, and in the case of Cold Heart the beam does exponentially more damage, so the longer it is focused on a single target and not the longer that it fires in general, and paired with a large magazine this means that you can put out a lot of damage to a boss or a tanky enemy. And we've seen Cold Heart become very popular in the raids because while it can do what most energy weapons can do, it also offers a pretty viable additional DPS tool in the right encounter. Prometheus Lens is a more single target focused trace rifle, causing a damaging heat field AoE and also reloading a portion of the mag on kills, although I don't want to say too much about the weapon right now because it's currently being reviewed and rebalanced. However, I do hope the weapon can still feel strong in PvE content. Also in this category, it's worth me throwing Sweet Business in there. Now this gives you a really large magazine on a weapon which starts at around about 360 RPM, but can go way beyond to plus 700 RPM as you continue to fire. So like the Cold Heart, it means you can put out a ton of damage on a boss or tanky target, but also Sweet Business is pretty fun for killing multiple enemies because unlike Cold Heart, you won't reset the damage that you're doing by changing targets. Also, the weapon will load ammo pickups into the mag as you fire, which is useful, and the addition of high caliber rounds is very good inside of PvE content. Overall, once again, thematically and in delivery, Sweet Business is a beast. There is another weapon to touch on here, and that would have to be the Risk Runner, a somewhat underappreciated SMG, so it can chain lightning and return ammo to the magazine just like Zalo's Supercell from D1. The difference being with this weapon, you have to be taking arc damage to proc that effect, so it's certainly not as strong, although it does also resist arc damage when the bonus is active, but Risk Runner is a ton of fun. Being close range, you do have to use it pretty aggressively and rely on its bonuses to keep going, but of course you won't be taking arc damage all of the time. Not all of the enemies in the game do arc damage, so it's pretty situational, but when it does its thing, it's pretty good at doing its thing. One final weapon to credit would be the Tractor Cannon, and this is pretty much based on innovation, so the weapon fires a powerful impulse to push enemies away. So for the first time, we've got a weapon which is actually designed around a physics impulse. Of course, we do get physics impulses on Wardcliff Coil or, you know, rockets, things like that. And for Tractor Cannon, it's certainly a very fun weapon. You can use it to push people off the map in PvP, you can use it to push a lot of ads off the side of things in PvE content, and of course the downside for this weapon is that you trade a lot of damage off. Obviously the weapon, if it did a whole ton of damage, kind of wouldn't work because a lot of the stuff you're attempting to, you know, blow away with the impulse would actually just get killed. So not really a super useful exotic in a ton of situations, situations, but certainly a very interesting one that is designed primarily around fun factor. So there we go guys, for me those are certainly the most exotic weapons in the game, and those which meet the criteria of power and cool mechanics in order to do something different. And I think it's cool to take a snapshot look at how they work and interact, and it also gives us an idea of how exotics have changed or fit into the sandbox in D2 versus D1. So I'd certainly love to hear your thoughts and favourite weapons in the comment section guys. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have, a like is very much appreciated below. If you're new to the channel and you want to see a lot more Destiny 2 content going forward, then feel free to hit that subscribe button. For now though, I appreciate you guys watching as always, and whatever you do, have an awesome day.